We're trying something a little different with Saving UX. Instead of one long interview, we're going to split it into two parts. A lot of really interesting discussion happens at the end when we're really digging into things. And I know folks are busy, and hopefully this makes it easier to catch everything. So enjoy part one of my conversation with Margot Bloomstein, and look for part two next week. Welcome to the Saving UX podcast. Now, I believe that UX is in trouble. And it's not that there aren't lots of people doing the work. There's tons, but I don't think we're having the impact that we could. I believe the impact per capita ratio is low, if you'll allow for that metaphor. Now, again, saving UX, it's not about saving our jobs. It's really about having the biggest positive impact that we can on the organizations and the real people that we're trying to serve. Now, I say that this is a podcast for people who give a shit because it's not enough to just complain about what's wrong. We have to work to make it better. So I'm your host, Jeremy Kriegel, a UX veteran of about 25 years. And today I have the great pleasure to have Margot Bloomstein with me. Margot is a veteran content strategist behind Appropriate Inc. and the author of two amazing books. The first one is Trustworthy, How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism and Bridge the Trust Gap. Oh, that's right. That's the latest book. The first book was Content Strategy at Work, Real World Stories to Strengthen Every Interactive Project. So highly recommend both of those. Now, full disclosure, Margot and I go way back. We went to undergrad together at Carnegie Mellon, and we worked together at Sapient, as in the .com consultancy boom era of the early 2000s. So with that, Margot, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. It's so nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great to catch up. So to kick things off, how do you see the current state of UX and content strategy, and maybe how has it changed in your tenure in the field?
I think things have expanded in a good way. There are more practitioners, certainly more diverse practitioners, which is good because we're bringing more diverse, more compelling, more useful ideas to the forefront by engaging more parts of the different populations, the different use bases that we hope to serve. And I think we see within both the user experience discipline as well as within my own practice, my own area of content strategy, we see how industries are maturing, and that means greater differentiation, greater specialization within those industries. And I think that's a good thing. It certainly caused some friction. I think we see when it plays out on design Twitter, that sense of, wounded injustice maybe play out when people say, my thing is not your thing. How dare your thing be a thing? And how that plays out, not necessarily to serve any parts of our industry, and certainly not to serve the work that we do. But I think that by and large, as our industries, as both the broader user experience industry and then design and content strategy and whatnot within it, as those different industries mature, it's been really good to see how we can continue to evolve to better meet the needs of our clients and stakeholders and better meet the needs of our users, as well as I think better find our best areas of service, our best areas of contribution within what we all do.
So now you're just going to counter my whole principle here that I'm talking about saving UX and it's struggling, and you're telling me it's doing great. Cool, let's go with that. What?
Oh, no. I'm not saying it's doing great. I see great things happening.
Got it.
But that is not to say that we are without our problems. That is not to say that we cannot continue to improve in how we do, how we serve the other industries and people and stakeholders that we serve, the other users that we serve, and in how we bring more people to the industry, how we ensure its continued growth. I think there are a lot of opportunities for ongoing improvement there as well.
All right. So I appreciate you, though, starting out with that there are good things happening. I think that's true, and we certainly don't want to ignore the very many positive contributions and evolutions that the field is going through.
I'm pragmatic. I'm progressive. I'm not Pollyanna.
So how have you seen it change in your tenure? What's different now from 10, 15 plus years ago?
maybe glorified brochureware, at least on the web. I think you saw how experience design was being practiced by designers, by copywriters, because we didn't use the term content strategy that much yet elsewhere, but in industries like museum exhibit design and among folks that develop like signage and wayfinding and things out in the real world. And I think that sense of, well, we need to meet the needs of our users, of consumers, of pedestrians, not just the folks that are funding this work. I think that belief was at the core of design in some of those other industries. But by and large, like in the early 2000s on the web, it was kind of glorified brochureware. I think certainly within design and information architecture, because we weren't talking about user experience design yet, and content strategy, so much of what we were doing was taking the voice of the brands that we were serving, their voice, their perspective, their interests, and pushing it out to people and hoping that it would resonate. And I think that model helped to get a lot of ideas out there, helped to get a lot of interesting ideas out there, but those ideas didn't necessarily always resonate. They didn't always reach their intended audiences or create the right conditions for action and interaction. And you correct me on this if you had a different perception of it, but for me, it was this shift in the industry of saying, well, wait, it can't just be about the brands that we serve if we're not helping them reach their goals of engaging audiences. We need to actually design for those audiences. Let's pull the pendulum in the other direction now and focus on more user-centered design. And for me, that always felt equally hollow. I think I've always wanted to find more of that balance between meeting the needs of our users and meeting the needs of the brands trying to engage them, if only because brand promise and differentiation, I think, is necessary. It is necessary within capitalism. I think it's necessary to meet the needs of people that are trying to decide on a purchase or decide on a vacation or decide where they want to like order food from tonight, or if they're opening up an app for Uber or an app for Lyft on their phone. I think every time people are at that kind of crossroads, at that sort of inflection point of saying, do I go left or do I go right? We can be there to say, designers can be there to say, here's why you should go in this direction, not just because this is the company paying me, but because maybe it's right for you too. And let's educate you. Let's inform you. Let me give you tools to self-educate so that you can feel more confident when you're making choices between multiple options. And I think that focus on centering the user's needs as well as the needs of the brand in those kinds of transactions, I think that's a lot of the value that we can provide. That's a lot of what I focus on in terms of how brands can build trust with their audiences. And I think way back to your question of several minutes ago now of kind of where we are now and how things have changed. I think that user experience designers, as well as designers in general, and maybe even marketers in general, if we don't realize that responsibility to help organizations differentiate and engage in a consistent, persistent way with their audiences, engage in a way that empowers those audiences, if we don't do that, we fail in our responsibility to our clients, to our companies, as well as to our end users. And that's the big change that I've seen over the past 10, 15 years, that we have more responsibility to do that. And if we don't do that, if we abdicate that responsibility, if we fail to help organizations put a stake in the ground around who they are and how they are, then we're missing out on so much opportunity, on so much responsibility. I would say that's where we veer into kind of missing out on the ethics and opportunity of our work.
Oh, ethics. That's a good place to dive into, and it kind of feeds into the question I was going to ask. And you talk about that tension between what customers want and what the brand or what the business wants. And ideally, you're looking for that sweet spot that's in the middle. But usually, kind of as you said, usually there's a pull one way or the other. Do you find that the teams you're working with are pulling in a certain direction, and how do you work to sort of pull them and find that balance?
It's lofty to talk about ethics, and then it is daily that we have to encounter the reality and objections to those ethical ideals. I think day to day in organizations, we do face the push and pull of budgets and timelines and just getting the thing done, getting it shipped, not because we need to meet some pressing need, but maybe because we need to get it done this quarter, or we need to do it before the budget dries up from last quarter, and all those types of things. And I think that reality is, it would be imprudent to ignore it, but also I don't think that those are constraints that make sense to ignore, because they frame what is feasible and what is sustainable within an organization. I find so much of the work that I do, kind of consulting around content strategy, does focus on not just the lofty ideals, not just putting castles in the sky, but now putting foundations under them to say, well, what is culturally appropriate in your organization? So I talk with a lot of brands around, there are the ideals, or maybe they want to know what are industry best practices or current trends. And then we always have to talk about, well, all right, so what's feasible here, though? What would be sustainable here? Because I think the idea of pushing a practice, pushing a content strategy model on an organization, pushing a new publishing model on them that isn't sustainable, that's irresponsible too. And I guess that point of irresponsibility, that to me is unethical work. And I think that in many organizations, it's tough to reckon with that, because we do see like the pressures from budgets and the pressures to just launch, to just get something out there. And we see what it looks like when organizations just get something out there. You see like the blog that launches and maybe has a few good posts, and then sort of digital tumbleweeds after about 6 months, because nobody thought, like, is this a sustainable editorial calendar? Do we have the in-house talent and interest and priorities and skill to meet these needs on an ongoing basis? So I think that's where we bump into questions of ethics a lot.
Yeah.
I think we all think that there are going to be like the big tough questions of like, would you take this kind of client, or, is your organization supporting some sort of nefarious politics? And yeah, those do come up a lot, but I think more often it's the smaller ethical issues that maybe are framed, they're framed in small ways around budgets and timelines, but they raise big questions of like, what are we doing? Why does it have to be on this frequency? Is that something that is right for us and right for our audience? And if not, why are we doing it?
I think everyone could probably relate to that notion of coming up with that great vision and then having it pared down to something significantly smaller. I'm curious if in that experience, if you've come across times where in that paring down, you've looked at what that realistic model would be and either felt that's not going to get you that's not going to accomplish what your goals are, or worse, that's actually going to be detrimental to either the business or the customers, or not. And if so, how do you react to that?
Yeah. I'm laughing because I've had a couple of those conversations just over the past few weeks. In one case, it was with an organization that I really wanted to work with them. They really wanted to work with me. And when it kind of came down to brass tacks and we were working through in the proposal process, when I was saying, here's how you've kind of framed your problem to me, they came to me and said, we think we need this, this, this. And it was sort of a laundry list of deliverables. And maybe they've worked with somebody before that had created those types of deliverables, or they've read a book on content strategy or attended a conference where they said, yep, we need these things. But in talking with them, I realized that those things wouldn't meet their needs. And I think that that's oftentimes an issue across the user experience discipline, where we're used to talking about our work and quoting our work as a series of activities and deliverables, but deliverables don't replace the conversation and the consulting and kind of the business strategy work. When we say we want to be at that table to talk about business strategy and kind of business vision, too easily we sometimes push ourselves back or are willing to slip back into just focusing on the tactical work that is so familiar and so much easier to quote. But sometimes the business strategy work entails making those tough calls and having those tough conversations to say, these things that you want will not meet your needs. They're not going to meet the needs of your audience or of your shareholders. In fact, they may actually be detrimental to your business and what you've articulated as like your long-term vision. So instead, we need to move in this direction, steer in this direction instead. And I find that when I've had those conversations with clients, sometimes they'll push back and say, well, no, we just want you to create those things because we already promised them to a senior VP, or we feel like what we really need are these kind of editorial style guidelines. We don't want to dig into messaging yet or something like that. And when I push back and say, well, we need to dig into that harder stuff. We need to dig into that more significant stuff and have those tough conversations. That can be an uncomfortable place. And I feel like that's where the, I guess, challenge and responsibility is on me to push back on them and say, if you want this work, there are other people beyond me that can do this work. If you want to hire me to do the best work that I can for you, if you want to hire me to get the best results for your business, let's keep talking. But it may not necessarily be through the deliverables that you've prescribed.
So two questions come to mind. One is a lot of people don't feel comfortable pushing back, especially on internal teams. So I guess, was that always the case for you, that you had that sort of inner strength where you had the confidence to push back on senior leadership? Did that evolve over time? Like, I guess, how did you develop that confidence in a way that other people might be able to follow if they're not feeling it now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always had to look to, I think I've always needed two things on projects. One, I've had to kind of fall in love with the work, fall in love with the project, and be so enthused about its potential impact that I could really give it all of my mind and attention, kind of pour my heart and soul into it. I think the other thing that I always needed to understand on a project was the impact of my work, whether it was creating editorial style guidelines, not just so that the company would have editorial style guidelines, but so that anybody contributing to the website or whatever moving forward would be able to do so in a consistent way that would be more efficient. They would feel more enthusiastic about it because they were getting things right the first time. It would save the company money and it would create a more consistent experience for their end users. I always needed to understand that kind of impact. So I think with some of those kind of prescribed deliverables that would sometimes early in my career be sort of handed to me in a statement of work, I would always need to understand, well, why do we sell these things? And if I could wrap my head around the impact that they would have and understand how things would relate to each other and the value that they would deliver for the client, then it would make sense. I could understand, all right, we do need to still engage in this way and go through these steps because of how everything fits together. But sometimes I would be having conversations with the account manager or project manager that it would end in them saying, yeah, it doesn't make sense for us to be doing this work. This is actually going to slow down the project or be a waste of time and budget. Let's go back to the client and talk about if this really does make sense. And sometimes those conversations would result in kind of a greater mutual respect with the client, better understanding of, sometimes they would say, we really, really just need to create an editorial calendar for just the next couple months because this is what we need to get more people on board with our mission. This is what we need to get more people contributing to the campaigns that we have going on moving forward. And after we get them on board, then they'll be able to evangelize other work within the team. So sometimes gaining a better understanding of those deliverables, even if it was for a short-term impact or to better understand the means to reach greater ends, that's what I would need, I think, to get on board with that work. But I think over the past 20 years, as my involvement in projects has changed, as I've grown more senior on those projects and have worked more in partnership with account managers to shape them or to doing the account management work myself, that kind of transition has allowed me to push back more appropriately and frame things more appropriately, where I felt like if an organization has a need and I am so bought into their need, I am so bought into their mission that I want to see them succeed, well, I don't want to see them wasting their budget or their time on things that I know will be detrimental. So sometimes those points of hesitancy simply are the fuel for additional conversations so that we do get on the same page.
The second question, maybe I should have asked this one first. How have you defined those boundaries, like where you kind of say, yeah, okay, this is cool, we can move ahead with this, or I need to stop you, we need to have this larger conversation around value and around what we're trying to achieve and maybe push back a little bit? How have you thought through that process for, in the past?
Well, I can tell you about with a project recently where we were hitting some of those kinds of stumbling blocks a little bit. Those little speed bumps along the way where it felt like we were maybe working more toward a statement of work and moving away from kind of the higher goals of the project. And it wasn't for any big philosophical or political kind of cause or anything. It was in a much more kind of I don't want to say humdrum industry, because it turns out every industry, when you dig into it more, becomes fascinating and far less humdrum than you ever imagined. But to do that work, it felt like we were starting to just sort of dot the I's and cross the T's. And so we kind of pumped the brakes a little bit. I was working closely with a project manager and an account manager, and I went to the two of them and I said, I feel like we're deviating here and maybe stepping away from the bigger vision and goals that the client has articulated. Am I missing something here? Do you know something that I don't? And it turned out they were also like, yeah, it feels like we're kind of like missing the bigger mark here, the bigger goal that we all had in mind. Let's set up that conversation with them. Let's talk through what else is driving this project. And sometimes you discover things along the way, like, well, you know what? There are these internal deadlines and deliverables that the client had promised kind of up the food chain in the organization. And I know sometimes that can feel irritating to get that information sort of as the project is already in process. But I do think that as part of believing in the work, whatever the nature of the project is, and believing in the stakeholder team, I look at it also as an opportunity to ultimately create heroes of the stakeholders with whom I'm partnering, so that eventually, as a consultant, I'm going to be rolling off the project. They will be there to continue the work. And I want to make sure that they are positioned appropriately to champion that work, that they've been able to establish the right alliances so that everyone else in the organization that needs to is bought into it and can kind of continue to see it through so that it will be sustainable and have a long impact and all. So sometimes having those conversations, again, going back to like, why are we doing this, and kind of pushing back on certain deliverables, I think it allows us to have greater impact with those deliverables too.
Yeah.
Can I answer your question right
So what's
on
really
that?
interesting is you seem to be able to hold in both very strong ways these sort of opposing elements of that vision and purpose, and the practicality and the real world constraints. And they both, and one doesn't seem to be, the practicality doesn't seem to be taking away too much from from that sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose seems to be what's giving you a lot of that strength and drive to be able to push back and make sure that the organization is going in the right way. Am I understanding that right?
I think that that's fair. Yeah. I think that that's probably a common thread through all my work and consulting and speaking. I think when we do our work well, we're constantly moving back and forth between those places of vision and inspiration and lofty goals, and then saying, how will we make them real? Well, what are the day-to-day constraints and practical requirements of time and budget and talent and opportunity costs, that if we're focusing our attention on these things, the same folks can't focus their attention on other things. So what are our priorities? I think we always have to be moving back and forth between the vision and purpose that is animating our work and then the practicality that is manifesting our work.
Yeah, something else that comes to mind, I've been hearing a lot in design circles, and I know the last year has been not a normal year. It's been hard in lots of dimensions, and that probably adds to this. But a lot of people are talking about feeling burned out. And from a professional side, it often comes from that feeling of constraint on those practicalities, if you will, the budgets, the time, the commitments that people feel like it's preventing them from doing the work that they're capable of. Do you find that? Do you find that holding that vision helps mitigate that sense of burnout? I'm just curious if you've experienced any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can call it burnout or malaise, or I think it was The Atlantic had a really good article on how so many of us are kind of languishing. And I think what has helped me along is figuring out the impact that I can have that is bigger than myself. And I know that sounds maybe altruistic and painfully cheesy, but I think at a very practical level, when I've been able to identify that the work that I'm doing can affect more people and bigger causes than I could do just on my own, whether it is writing to a senator or voting or participating in postcards to voters or anything like that, that has been the thing that has gotten me out of bed to keep doing the work. Or, I mean, I'm not really a morning person. That has been the thing that has kept me up late to keep doing the work.
I'm so trying to become a morning person. It's such an uphill battle. And this year has been hard for that.
Play to your strength. At 1 a.m., play to your strength.
The world doesn't like being up when I'm up. I actually totally agree with you. It does sound, cliche, like, oh, find the meaning, find your impact. But, I think sometimes these become cliches for a reason, because there is a strength there. So they get repeated over and over again, but they're, take away the familiarity from repetition, and there's still a kernel of truth to it.
And I think that the best antidote to whether it is anguish or anxiety is activity. Like, start doing something. And for me, for a large part of certainly of the pandemic, it was writing Trustworthy, getting that out there, because I was hearing from so many friends saying, like, within marketing and design and content strategy circles, saying like, I don't work for 18F. I don't work for the CDC. If I'm not working for government, if I'm not working on behalf of voter rights or public health, what good am I possibly doing? How much does my work really matter? Whether they were in agencies or in-house, saying, I'm selling widgets, basically. And I think that sense of like, how much does my work really matter? That is the thing that is the feeling that undermines our ability to do work. And I don't say that as like what will happen to capitalism then if you're not doing your work kind of mindset. I say that because when we identify with the work that we do, when we feel some sense of value in it and importance in it, and when we see the impact that our work has on the companies with which we work, when we feel like our work is tied to a larger purpose, so much sense of identity and confidence comes from that. Being good at your job, feeling like you're good at your job, and being rewarded for being good at your job, as well as feeling like you can complete things at your job, that fuels so much of our sense of self-worth and confidence. And I think when you are separated from that, when you don't see the impact of your work, or when you feel like you don't have the level of focus or the tools to be able to see your work through, when you feel like you're constantly being interrupted throughout the day with like Zoom requests or whatever, or a bunch of pop-ups in Slack, that interrupts that sense of flow that I think Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote about, that we need to have this sense of flow in our work to feel a sense of ongoing effort and being able to see things through to completion, that gives us this deep-seated sense of joy and purpose. And it can come outside of work too, like with a craft project or artwork, or maybe it's a climbing route that you've been working on for a long time that finally you're able to do. I think that sense of purpose, though, has been interrupted for so many people, or derailed for so many people over the past year. And that's a real problem. And I think being able to find that sense of purpose again is so vital for our sense of well-being. And part of my interest in writing Trustworthy was to say that regardless of your industry, whether you work in public health or government or far beyond it, that's fine. What can you do to empower your audiences? What can you do through copywriting and design and user experience design and marketing? What can you do to empower your audiences, rebuild their sense of confidence? Because that is something then that they bring into other parts of their lives. That's how we fight gaslighting. That's how we create a more engaged electorate. That's how we reset our society. And that work is very much in the hands of designers and copywriters and marketing folks. And that was kind of the purpose that was animating so many of my days. As we said, not getting me up in the morning, but keeping me up working late at night.
It reminds me of a couple of things. Real quick, there's a phrase I came across a number of years ago, went something like, depression hates a moving target. You just keep going, right? So I always love that. And the second, it took me a while to realize this, but at one point I was looking back on my career and what I'd really found satisfaction in. And surprisingly, that some of the gigs that I liked the most were in some of the least sexy areas. I mean, right out of college, my first gig, I was working at Xerox, doing basically really complex print drivers for massive machines. You put a tree in one end, you get a book out the other. And you're helping like a big print shop that might have a lot of these things print annual reports faster. And from that perspective, not that interesting. But I started to go spend time with the people there, and here are these people that are spending 8 miserable hours a day in this awful software. So it became, well, I may not necessarily be attached to the output of this product, but I can work to help the people who have to use it. Because if I make this easier, I make their day better, noticeably better and less frustrating. I found I could get behind that. I joined Gemvara years ago. I had no interest in jewelry, but I met the team and I was like, oh, these are great people. I want to work with these people. And again, once I started to get to know the users, I'm like, wow, these are people who want to do something special for someone they really care about. I don't have to care about jewelry to really want to get behind that. So the more I find I can connect with the people, there are far more mundane elements of our life that aren't, the big causes, which are great. But, we all don't live our lives totally in those big causes. We have our everyday lives to live, but there's lots of opportunities to make those better.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah, I think finding those opportunities to figure out the meaning in your work, that's what makes the work so much more relevant to you and valuable too. And I think if you are pouring that, 1% more of yourself and your time and talent and creativity into it, whether as a freelancer or independent contractor, or if you're in-house at a corporation, that's what's going to better serve you too. That's what's going to let you leave at the end of the day and feel like, I did some good work today. I did some good work that's going to mean something to somebody, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's part 1 of my conversation with Margot Bloomstein. Check out part 2 next week, or now if you're listening in the future. Also, be sure to check out Margot's latest book, Trustworthy, How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism and Bridge the Trust Gap. There are links to Amazon and a local bookseller in the show notes at www.sux.live. That's SUX for Saving UX. Tune in next week to hear the rest of the conversation.